Hello and welcome back. Welcome back to the Mastering Azure Data Factory 30-day crash course. This is day 3 of our 30 videos. So in day 1, we uncovered what Data Factory really is, which is a serverless cloud-native data integration tool that lets you build scalable ETL workflows without having without heavy coding. And then in day 2, we compared ADF with tools like SSIS and Synapse, and so how ADF stands out with its flexibility, hybrid cloud support, and pay-as-you-go model. Now, in day 3, we're getting to the real building blocks, which is pipelines, data sets, and link services. These are the foundational pieces that power every data movement and transformation inside ADF. So if you understand these three, then you can build anything from a simple CSV to SQL copy job to enterprise scale, data orchestrations. So in this video, let's let's break them down and bring it all together with real world example. All right. So let's go. All right. So core components in ADF, your data workflows are powered by three main concepts: pipeline, which is controls the flow; uh, data sets, they define source and sync schema; link services, secure your connections. That's just a general description. Now let's go into deep dive into what each one of them are. So we'll start with a pipeline. So what is a pipeline? So a pipeline in Azure Data Factory it is the central unit of orchestration. It defines the logical grouping of activities that work together, to perform a task, such as copying data and transforming it, running store procedures, or calling an Azure function. So you can think of it like a workflow or a recipe that organizes multiple steps and determines when, how, and in what order they execute. So we just mentioned pipeline activities. So what are pipeline activities? A pipeline contains, activities, and each activity performs a specific function. So here are the types of activities we have. We have data movement, which is copy activity; data transformation, which is data flow activity; mapping data flows; control flow, which is for each if condition, wait or execute pipeline; or external execution, which would have like wave activity, uh, Azure functions, or store procedures. And you can combine these activities into sequences, conditional branches or loops to perform your tasks. So how do pipelines use other components? Data sets define the data structure your pipeline reads and writes. Link services supply the connection info to access your source and destinations. Triggers define when a pipeline runs, whether it's manual, scheduled or event based, or a tumbling window. So what's a pipeline execution flow? First, trigger initiates the pipeline, then pipeline executes its activities in order that defined. Third, activities read and write using data sets. And fourth, the data sets are linked to link services. So and you can you can monitor your execution in real time in the monitor tab of ADF. So what's a use case scenario? So in this example, we want to move CSV blob from blob to Azure SQL. So we're going to use the components we're going to use are going to be pipeline, and then the example values customer data pipeline, and activities, which is going to be copy activities, source data set. We have a CSV file from blob, sync data set, which is SQL table in Azure SQL, link services, which is Azure blob in Azure SQL. Then we have our trigger, which is going to schedule it for daily at 2 a.m. So what are best practices? Always try to use parameters to make pipelines reusable across datasets or folders. Name activities clearly, which is going to help you for better monitoring, you know, debugging, or like if you deploy it now and then come back after 2 months, so that you'll be able to easily identify what the task is. Uh, and then use a failure path logic, such as email or alert or something. So in case you know that uh, in case something goes wrong and it fails, then you'll be notified. Mm. So the earlier you get notified, the better it's going to be. Uh, and then store outputs or errors in log tables, again for failures. Um, and try to minimize long chains in one pipeline. Break them apart into you know modular pipelines and call it using the execute pipelines. So what are common misconceptions in the method? Pipeline move the data? No. Activities move data. Pipeline organizes them. One pipeline per file? No. We can use parameters for and reusability. Everything must be manual? No. We can use triggers for automation. So here's a visual flow. The pipelines like we discussed. You'll have a trigger, it started, and then we have your pipeline, and we'll do the copy activity from source data set, and then you have link services, and uh, you have your sync data set and links to link services. Okay. I hope this makes sense. If it doesn't, then feel free to you know to put any of your questions or comments in the comment section, and I'll be sure to get back to you. All right. So now let's look at the second component, which is a data sets. So we'll also do deep dive of these data sets. So, so what is a data set? So in Azure Data Factory, a data set represents the schema and location of your data. It tells ADF what data you're working with and where it resides. Think of a data set as a pointer and the schema definition. It's tied to a link service for connection. It describes structure, such as file, table, format. Uh, and it helps ADF know how and where to interact with the data. So there are two broad categories of uh, data sets. You have your input data set, which is data you're reading from, and then you have your output data set, data you're writing into, which is like a SQL table or a file or something. So and then these are used in copy, lookup, data flow, and metadata activities. So it so ADF supports many data sets, like I think we have mentioned it before, such as flat file, CSV, JSON, Parquet, XML, or databases, which is Azure SQL, Oracle, Postgres, or MySQL, cloud stores, Azure Blob, Azure Data Lake, S3, Snowflake, or APIs, which is REST, HTTP, and Webtable, among others. So, what is the relationship between datasets and link services? So, link services is the purpose is connection, you know, connection configuration, you know, or authorization, URL, DB names, etc. Datasets is data schema plus location within that connection. So one thing keep in mind, you must define a link service before creating a dataset. An example is link services is Azure Blob Storage connection, and a dataset would be a CSV file named, for example, customers.csv inside a raw data container. Well, so what are the key properties of a dataset? So when creating a dataset, you define the file format, for example, whether it's limited text or something, or and the link service to use, and the file path or table name, the column, you know, the column schema, which is optional for schema on read. So because ADF can infer schema for many formats like CSV or CSV and JSON. So before we go to the use case, so we can say where are the data sets used? Data sets are, referenced inside copy activities, which is source and sync, lookup and get meta activities, and data flows. And each activity inside a pipeline can use multiple data sets for input and output. So here's our use case example. So our task is we copy customer CSV file from Azure Blob to Azure SQL database, and so we can have our link service, which is Azure Blob, and then we have that our data set one right here, which is our source data set, customer CSV, which is the input, and then we have link service two, which is Azure SQL, and then we have a data set, which is customers, DBO customers, which is the table, the output table, and then we use copy activity, and we have the Blob plus SQL link service, which, as we discussed, was the link service one and link service two. So, best practices. So, for best practice, reuse data sets across pipelines and parameterize files or table names for flexibility. Limit access at the link service level, not at the dataset level, and use preview data in the UI, to validate format before running. Okay, I hope that made sense. If not, if you have any questions again, just put them in the comments, and we'll all learn from it. Okay, so let's take a deep dive into linked services. So a link service in Azure in ADF is essentially connection configuration that defines how ADF connects to external resources such as Azure SQL, Blob, REST API, or non or on-prem system. So think of it as a connection string and authentication stored securely. And before we get to this, and the link service also holds, you know, authentication method, which is key or managed identity, username, and password. It also has like the host name or endpoint URL, runtime integration settings, which is Azure or self-hosted integration runtime or credential time. So examples of linked services, which is Azure SQL DB, which is named here at Azure SQL Database, Azure Blob Storage, uh, REST API, which is a REST service, Amazon S3, uh, or Oracle MySQL, or on-prem DB, which is self-hosted, which you need instead integration runtime. So what's the relationship to other ADF components? You have your, you have your data set, which refers to link services to access data. You have activities, some activities such as web lookup, directly use link services, and then you have your pipelines, which contain activities that indirectly use link services through datasets. One thing to keep in mind is no dataset or activity can function without a link service to connect to the actual data source or destination. So we have the different types of authentication: account key, which is for storage. You have Azure Managed Identity, username and password, Azure Key Vault reference. So we have an example here, which is our use case or our task is to copy CSV from Blob to SQL DB. So you have your link service. uh, You have your link service one, Azure Blob Storage, which is read CSV from Blob, and then you have your service two, which is Azure SQL Database, which is write to SQL table, and then you have uh, your data movement, which is handled by copy activity. So each data set for the source and sink, they must reference the correct link service. Okay, so what are the best practices? Use Azure Key Vault for credentials. Use managed identity when possible, and give descriptive names, as we discussed before, and test connections during setup, not after running it, and separate your environments like dev, test, production with separate link services. So, what are the common mistakes to avoid? avoid hard coding credentials in UI. Use Instead use Azure Key Vault or parameterized integration runtime, and uh, avoid using one link service for all stages. Separate 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 them by instead separate them by environment. So put dev, QA, or prod, and then avoid forgetting to assign the correct integration runtime. Always choose correct integration runtime. So so that's gonna conclude uh, our linked services. And now we want to look at, now that we know all three uh, components, now let's try to understand the Azure Data Factory flow breakdown, which is let's try to understand how data moves through ADF. Okay, so ADF, orchestrates data movement from source to destination. So, and as you can see here, we have our source and linked services, data set, pipeline activity, and sync that's orchestrated by ADF. So this is like a real-time example. We can have a source file that's coming that's coming from somewhere, and like let's say a bank is sending your payment, your account to the uh, central system. So it may come like in a CSV file, and then it goes through Azure, goes through a data transformation, and then after that, then you'll be able to view your transactions in the end. So what's this is a task. This is our task. This is a real order, a real world example. So our task here is to move customers' data into Azure SQL. So we have our source, which is a blob CSV. We have our sinks database, which is a SQL table in Azure, and then we use our link services to connect to the blob and the SQL, and we use a pipeline that contains copy activity to do the transformation. So this is our visual flow. We see the link service dataset pipeline, and uh, and each layer. One thing we have to understand is each layer plays critical role in orchestrating a secure and reliable data workflows. Okay, so what's the step-by-step process of ADF execution flow? So as you can see, the first one is pipeline is triggered, activity references, input data sets and link services, and then data is pulled from source, data is transformed or copied, and then output data sets and link services pushed to sync. So now, now that you've seen how pipelines, datasets, and link services work together to move and transform data in Azure Data Factory, you're officially past the beginner line. These three components are the heart of every ADF solution, and mastering them sets the foundation for everything that we're going to do ahead. So in the next section, we'll demystify, integration runtimes. We'll see what they are, when to use each type, and how to make the right choice for your workloads. So if this video helped clarify anything today, let me know in the comments. And if you're feeling stuck, also drop your questions below so we can learn together. Or if you want me, if there's some part of it that you want me uh, to change to make it better, please comment as well. And also, my question to you is that what part of today's lesson helped you the most, if it did? Is it pipelines, link services, data sets? So drop drop a comment or question, and I'll feature the best response in the next videos. As usual, I ask you to like if you enjoyed this content, or comment, and also subscribe so that you know when the next video comes up. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in day 4.